Today we're going to have a good old-fashioned nerd debate. Well, I guess it ain't much of a debate since I can't talk to the other person, but so more of a response video to ClassicmanD's short about what apocalypse, or rather pandemic, would you want to be in? Zombies, various, or the Simeon Flu. Now, before we start, ClassicmanD or Dwayne Nation, as he goes on Twitter, great channel, check him out. I'll link him in the description below. So I figure this is an easy decision. Like, Simeon Flu every day. The zombie apocalypses are just too scuffed. You're not going to want to be in a zombie apocalypse. But then he chooses the zombie apocalypse. I'm like, what? His reasoning was pretty simple. There are ways to avoid the zombies, and zombies, as they're doing with the walkers, are not really that deadly. Compared to the Simeon Flu wipes out 90% of mankind. It makes you have to deal with sentient monkeys, or primates, and on top of that, it makes you stupider. With that established, I'm going to tell you why I strongly disagree with him, and why you should pick the Simeon Flu every day of the week, because screw zombie apocalypses. Now, I'm going to establish a ground rule before we get started. You cannot avert the apocalypse. You can't find a wonder drug that's going to cure the Simeon Flu, and you can't kill patient zero for the zombie apocalypse. So by this discussion, you are already in the apocalypse, and I'm going to isolate this to you're in the apocalypse, not the beginning part of the apocalypse. Because if we're going to choose, like, hey, which apocalypse do you want to start out in, I'm choosing zombie. Because if you and some boys get together with enough brains, you could easily stop a zombie apocalypse. Armor up a vehicle, get a tank, and go crunchy, 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 crunch. Simeon Flu is going to be like COVID-19. That's going to do considerable more damage than zombies. So, with those two rules aside, let's start. First off, there are 333.29 million people in the United States as of 2022. So, if we have 10% surviving, that's 33.329 million people are going to survive. Versus roughly 6,000 primates. Because there's less than 6,000 primates in the United States. I saw that statistic a while back. There's just not that many. I tried to find a statistic for how many primates are in the whole world, but we're just going to leave this to the United States. Already, we have a numeric advantage against the primates, but it gets better. So, Dwayne's information is a bit wrong. The first version of the Simeon Flu killed 90% of mankind. The second version is what made you dumber. Now, the cerebrum controls speech and lots of other functions. If you damage the cerebrum, you're killing a person. You are not just going to rip out the ability to speak. You would leave humanity as a bunch of stroke victims rather than having them only a primitive hunter-gatherer society. So, right off the bat, because it is biologically impossible, because we're removing plot from either the zombie apocalypse and the Simeon Flu. So there's no plot protecting this and making stuff happen. There cannot be a wave 2 of the virus. So we're just left with the wave 1, which kills 90% of mankind. Which, as we've already established, not that bad numerically. Now let's look at the sentient monkey problem. Okay, there's no sentient monkey problem. See, guns are a thing, and plot's doesn't exist in real life. That little monkey rebellion in San Francisco, yeah, Caesar does not live through the first movie. None of them do. Instantaneously, all those monkeys in San Francisco are dead. They don't even see the end of the movie. There is no large sentient monkey population problem in the continental United States. Right off the bat, you don't have to deal with that. Now, another interesting facet, as we look at COVID-19, we knew there was a bunch of drugs that treated COVID-19. Now, as I've established, we cannot avert the apocalypse. But let's look at COVID-19 and compare it. What it's going to boil down to is how truthful the government's going to be with us. So, while they were telling you various medications didn't work, and while doctors were actually prescribing them, they were taking those medications when they got COVID-19. Let's just say that plays out as well. What we're going to end up with is a lot of dead in cities. And you're going to have a certain class of people that we're going to be without. So people who are strong supporters of the government, believe in the media, socialists, Marxists, And anyone on the right and center, because there's a ton of ideologies that are loosely together in those areas, as the left is more unified ideologically with only a handful of ideologies versus the center and the right. Anyone who is strongly believing in the state or dumb enough to believe the media is going to be dead. Right off the bat, I don't even think we're going to be hitting 33 million. I think we'll probably end up closer to 70 million surviving with guns. There's more guns in the United States than there are people. And on top of that, let's just say we get the 90%. Okay, we just go random military armory. So you're looking at sentient apes, the small that manage to survive and want to rebel against mankind, versus humans and tanks, humans and armored personnel carriers, humans with snipers, humans with military knowledge. Like, it doesn't matter if you become smart, you're not going to suddenly develop and refine military tactics that took hundreds upon hundreds of years to do. You're going to be hitting people like ragtag guerrilla militias, and you're just going to get slaughtered. And another issue is the 6,000 monkeys. A lot of them, they have no beef with mankind. You're going to have like pockets of humanity, which you have sentient gorillas, chimpanzees, and all that, living side by side with humans. You might even have warlords who are literally gorillas leading a bunch of humans. Because right now, IQ-wise, gorillas are pretty much mid-human. Like, not mid-human, but they are smarter than a lot of the lower echelons of humanity. IQ-wise. Them getting the ability to speak ain't going to change much. And there was an interesting argument that said that we could actually retool schools. And I'm going to change the wording of this, but the guy got banned off Facebook. He's like the world's smartest person. He's the person with the world's highest IQ. And he made it more race-related, but I want to keep this more PG. That you could retool schools to teach gorillas today than you could to teach the dumbest people of humanity. It would be easier to do so. The Simeon Flu is going to suck. It's going to be any viral pandemic, and you're automatically just going to be in the post-apocalypse. Pretty quickly. Society is going to be rebounding. It really depends on where you live, how scuffed your life is going to be. If you live in one of the areas that's going to descend to absolute chaos, like cities, yeah, you might be screwed. But if you live in areas that can manage to keep their stuff together, you're going to do pretty okay in the Simeon Flu. So I'm picking the Simeon Flu just because, one, there's not going to be no brain degradation because that's not biologically possible. Two, there's a good chance we're going to have medications that can treat the Simeon Flu. And it's just going to be a matter of whether or not you can get your hands on those. And there's a good chance that you could just survive by being immune. And even in the movie, the version that makes people dumb, there are people who are immune to that. And then there's the last issue. We have missiles and nukes. They're not going anywhere. So let's just say, hypothetically, the primates, the 6,000 versus people with guns, manage to somehow win a victory. We just wipe them off the map with missiles. So I'm not concerned about sentient primates. That's not really going to be a thing without plot. And in reality, you don't have plot. Now, a zombie apocalypse, way worse. Let's just pick The Walking Dead, which he assumed we were going to be in. Okay, everyone's infected. You have someone randomly die in the middle of the night. They're becoming a zombie. And they could wipe out a good chunk of your group or even settlement by spreading the virus through biting people. It's like, imagine like you have a group of like 10 people in a settlement of 1,000. One person dies, they infect their nearby friends and family because they get bit before anyone knows you better, and they start turning. And then you can just have a cascade effect throughout your entire cell because anyone and everyone can turn. And keep in mind, The Walking Dead is one of the nicer zombie apocalypses, which we're going to get into later. Right off the bat, you have that as a major issue. And here's the really scuffed part of a zombie apocalypse. Let's look at a game called Dead State. In Dead State, you could do everything right. You could start clearing out zombies around every area, your scavenger, anything. You have a successful settlement built up, tons of survivors, and the area's gone. Because the military lost control of the nuclear power plant, zombies overran it, and it's going to melt down. So even in a zombie apocalypse, you could do everything right and then still lose. Whereas in the Simeon Flu, you could do everything right, and you're going to come out pretty okay. Then there are the super hordes. What's a super horde, you may be wondering? Okay, when cities like New York City fall, let's just say 90% of the population gets converted, 10% magically. New York City has a population as of 2020 of 8.8 million people. So let's just say 8 million get converted to zombies. Or you could say 7.5. That's a horde the size of 7.5 million infected. Barreling down on you. In the World War Z books, the horde coming out of New York City ran all the way down the highway across several states. Imagine doing everything right. You've cleared out the infected. You have medication that can treat the infection. You have supplies. You have medical resources. And then you still lose because your nearby city had the horde inside of it start moving outward toward your location. It doesn't matter how good you are. You can't stop a horde in the millions or hundreds of thousands. And that's just looking at walkers. Let's look at other zombie apocalypses. Left 4 Dead. That's a zombie apocalypse. World War Z, the movie, where you have runners. State of Decay is probably one of the nicer apocalypses. And then we learn, because you can treat that. There's cures for the blood plague. But we're learning from the latest trailer for 3 that animals are also now infected. So you have to deal with mutants. You have to deal with infected animals. And cities are straight up no-go zones. Zombie apocalypses can get outright scuffed. Like, at the worst end, you have necromorphs. Now, necromorphs are kind of like technically zombies, but technically not zombies. But would you rather deal with Simeon Flu, even at its worst, making you stupider? And so you get to live out your life as a hunter-gatherer society which can't talk, that would never function. You can't lose the ability to talk and have a hunter-gatherer society. Coordination between people is straight up required to be able to have a hunter-gatherer society. And even if you lose the ability to vocalize, you would also then lose the ability to use hand signs, right? So plot really keeps that going. So even then, knowing that you could basically fade out into extinction because, let's just say, the cerebrum is getting eviscerated and you couldn't find a medication, that is still better than knowing that as soon as you die, the markers will just resurrect you. That's still better than knowing that when you die, you'll come back as a Zed and that your family will have to put you down. Let's look at some others. There's High School of the Dead, which is kind of more of a classic Romero. Super easy to get infected. I am not going to do 28 Days Later. Not a big fan of that series. The first movie was okay, but 28 Days is like one of those franchises where you liked when you first saw it years ago, but as you've aged, you realize they're kind of straight up terrible movies that are hyper unrealistic. But let's look at that. Easily infected. They run at you. Yeah, you're screwed. Then there's the Train to Seoul or whatever that Korean movie was, where the rules for how quickly you get infected and how easy it is to get infected keep shifting. But look at that movie. And let's look at State of Decay. Remember, the initial virus spread throughout Trumbull Valley because it was in the water. Again, imagine doing everything right and then having your civilization wiped out because your water supply upstream got contaminated by infected. But Kevin, what about just The Walking Dead? Okay, so you're not going to have access to medical resources, so it's going to be fairly common. People are just going to die from stuff like the common cold. And then they're just going to rise again. Even in the worst case, I would rather have the Simeon Flu than deal with a zombie apocalypse. If we get to pick which apocalypse we're starting in, oh yeah, hands down, zombie all the way. It is way easier to put to bed a zombie apocalypse in the orderly stages than it is to stop the Simeon Flu, because the Simeon Flu is going to spread like COVID. A zombie apocalypse, like look at Resident Evil games. not the remakes, the classic games. That outbreak was put down within by nuking a single city. The military is very easily able to cordon off a city and then keep the infection there. Let's look at Zombie. Same thing. The military was able to successfully isolate the virus and the infection to London. In Dead Rising, Willamette, Las Vegas, like the military knows how to properly contain and isolate the viruses, the infection. Dead Rising. Again, easily isolated, stopped. The virus was quarantined onto islands. Then you have some new stuff, which might be multiversal, like some kind of flesh god that wants to eat everything. And the sequel, which is, again, like supremely scuffed, because either you're a Newman or you're screwed. And in the first one's either you're immune or you're screwed. And let's look at Dying Light. Dying Light's probably one of the more tamer zombie apocalypses you could be in, because I forgot to mention Dying Light earlier. I really should have. Especially since I'm streaming Dying Light 2 right now. Like, okay, you could easily take down the infected because there's runners. Then there's all the mutants. The runners and the stumblers are going to be easiest, and the mutants are going to be what get you. Imagine having to deal with volatiles in your apocalypse. But even then, in the original Dying Light, they were able to contain the outbreak to Husan. Dead Island 2, they, as I mentioned earlier, pretty scuffed, but they were able to contain the outbreak to L.A. So the military, if it's intelligent and not like just written to be stupid, depending on how the outbreak starts, can easily contain a zombie outbreak. So if we're in an outbreak, even if the quarantine fails, you might have months, if not years, before you have to deal with the actual bulk of the outbreak. And at that point in time, if you're not prepared, that's on you. But the Simeon Flu, that's some whack job lab screwing up like the... Can we mention who caused the outbreak on YouTube now? Let's just say you know who screwed up. Which is a whole complex topic involving multiple nations. Oh, man. And then it just spreading worldwide. Like, you're not containing the Simeon Flu. Like, your best recourse is that they find out, like, oh, hey, this really easily available medication can easily treat the Simeon Flu, like we did with COVID-19. And then they later admitted it while they were taking it themselves. Again. How bad the Simeon Flu is going to go is going to be 100% dependent on how much an elite that want to depopulate the world actually try to go through with their depopulation efforts and their corruption efforts to get more power. It's 100% going to be dependent on that. Because even after they're gone, there's a good chance during the aftermath, people are going to be like, oh, hey, we found out that medication X treated the Simeon Flu real easily, so if anyone ever shows signs of having the Simeon Flu, we just give them this medication and you good to go. Zombie apocalypse, yeah. Imagine surviving a zombie bite and then having to take a medication your entire life or you turn. That would be Dead Rising. And then imagine a bunch of conspiracies where the virus is spread by parasitic wasps. And, like, not just bites. Like, you could literally just get stung by a parasitic wasp. Or parasitic bees, whatever they were. And then, boom, now you're going to turn into a zombie. That was the original Santa Cabeza incident. So you're telling me you'd rather deal with the potential of parasitic bees, parasitic wasps, mutants, random people dying and wiping out your entire settlement, super hordes, than the Simeon Flu, which is way weaker when it doesn't have plot back in it. Yeah, man. That's why you should be choosing the Simeon Flu every day of the week. It's just your standard viral apocalypse. There's a very high chance we'll survive it. Zombie apocalypses, once they get going, they are beyond scuff, and it's just a matter of how screwed you are. Because if the virus is just in humans, we could probably ride that out. Like, realistically, zombies decay. If they're mutants or infected, again, like 28 days later, we just have to wait for them to starve out. If they're actually intelligent mutants, infected, we can eventually route it. But it can get exponentially worse. But what if the virus doesn't just stay in humans? Look at Resident Evil. Crows, dogs, insects, plants. Imagine having to deal with a whole host of mutant creatures on top of zombies. Like, your best case is that you're only dealing with human infected. It could get exponentially worse. Like, you might get in a scenario where your best outcome is humanity is not going to survive, but the evolved human-like infected that still have their intelligence, such as in I Am Legend, are going to replace you. I don't know about you. I hope I've swayed you. I hope now you're going to be like, yeah, I'm just going to take the regular viral apocalypse, because based on plot not being in existence and realism, we're probably pretty good there. Versus the, oh hell no, we are royally screwed zombie apocalypse. Now, don't get me wrong, a zombie apocalypse would be funner. But, that's when you play games. Reality's going to be very different. Let me know down in the comments which one you're now picking. Peace.